I like to think I've lived a good life. I like to think I lived a life that is fair and honest, and I've never really done anything bad or wrong. But throughout the entire 2.5 hours that I watched Heroes of Wrestling, which graced the pay per view screen in 1999, I felt as if I had committed some sort of atrocity equal on par with Nazi war crimes to have deserved the punishment of having to sit through 2.5 hours of quite literally the worst wrestling show, period, ever. It might even be the worst expression of art or creativity ever made. No exaggeration, no hyperbole. Heroes of Wrestling, 1999's awful, awful gift to the world. Here you go, pre 2000 millennium. Here's this shining turd of trash, of garbage production, terrible camera angles, awful audio, insultingness, offensiveness, terribleness, every single adjective that could go into describing a murder or something destructive or something that smells awful or tastes awful or is overall just repulsive. Anything that could describe that could be applied to Heroes of Wrestling. No hyperbole, no exaggeration, worst wrestling show ever. You may have heard that before, you may not have seen it. For those of you who don't know, this wrestling pay-per-view, a pay-per-view, came out in 1999, the peak of the wrestling period in America. And some promoter, I don't know who the hell it is, thought, hey, wouldn't it be a great idea if we brought back the stars of yesteryear and we put them all under the same roof for one more night to showcase to the fans, and we'll put it on pay-per-view, and we'll kind of make it seem like a big deal. And I guess in some sort of warped theory, without any sort of advanced thought, just a quick, oh yeah, that sounds all right. No further exploration, no further delving into the logistics of this whole affair. I guess that would maybe make sense. It's kind of like if you had a crackhead criminal cousin and you heard from someone that, oh, they're coming over and they've been good lately. They're coming over for Christmas. They've been good lately. And you don't really think about it. You don't think of how awful that actually does sound. But you got, okay, maybe. And you have this glimmer of hope, this faint optimism that maybe Heroes of Wrestling, this pay-per-view, that really is just featuring washed-up wrestlers or no-name wrestlers and wrestlers in very varying degrees of awful physical and mental states, maybe through some pure hope in hell, this won't be an abomination. And your first clue as to why any sort of optimism should just be completely crushed and demolished is in the intro video for the actual pay-per-view, because it really sets the tone. Oh, it looks not too bad. The video effects aren't too bad. Well, maybe this actually could be all right. Maybe the crackhead cousin will come over and not be an embarrassment to our family name. And then you see how they hype the wrestlers, in that they show, in the promotional video for Heroes of Wrestling, they show these legends entering to a ring in a high school gym. This is your showcase. These bigger than Earth, these massive Goliath superstars of wrestling entering in a high school gymnasium. This is when your thought kicks in, if it hasn't already. Maybe you woke up a little bit too early this morning. Your brain's not firing 100%. This is when there are no doubts about it. You are in for 2.5 hours of torture. The crackhead cousin is busted through the door with the crack pipe in his front pocket, and he's ready to smoke it, and he's ready to hit on your auntie, and he's ready to just be an awful human being. This is Heroes of Wrestling. Your crackhead cousin that you don't want around, but somehow, someway, it is forced in front of you, and now you are forced to deal with it for the next 2.5 hours. Buckle up and get ready for the worst show ever. Ever. God damn it. I'll just start by saying, okay, so the production values, and okay, they did it at some casino, and like I said, the videos, aside from what they're actually showing, some technology went into it. but shortly you find that the camera angles and the audio is just awful, terrible, poor. The only redeeming thing on audio is Dirty Dutch Mantel, and he's on commentary throughout the whole thing, and he would be a positive for me. He would be some sort of glimmering, shining light in this whole thing if the entire time I wasn't feeling sorry for him. Because time and time again, he is having to make up for the atrocity in front of him by trying to come up with some sort of reason as to why the wrestlers are fumbling about. Why are they seeming as if they've gone off the deep end? This man really tries to pull a rabbit out of his hat. Sometimes he's successful, sometimes he's not. He's also dealing with a broadcast partner who doesn't know a wrist lock from a wrist watch, and that's not an exaggeration. So credit to him. He would be a positive if I could have stopped feeling bad for him, which I could not, because it was impossible. God damn it. This show, Heroes of Wrestling, will offend people who value wrestling. Because if you've ever valued any sort of wrestling match, if you've ever enjoyed wrestling for at least 10 seconds, if you've ever enjoyed a wrestler, a wrestling move, a name in wrestling, anything, if you have ever thought to yourself at any point, at the very least, oh, I kind of like that, and it's related to wrestling, this will be offensive to you. Because this is an insult, a mockery to all of wrestling as a whole. Not an exaggeration, that is the truth. This will offend people who like money, because this event cost money to put on, and what a waste of money. Pay the wrestlers, they probably needed it, that's fine, but the production values, and people actually paid to see this. Pay-per-view, they showed up and bought tickets, they paid for this on their TV. That money could have went, I could think of 3 trillion things that money could have been better off. That money, however much this thing cost on pay-per-view, I'm hoping it was only something like $10. You should have taken your $10 bill, you could have went into a field, and you could have buried it there. And that would have been a better use for it, because somewhere down the line, maybe like a 5-year-old finds it, and he could have went and bought candy for himself. That would have been a better use. Literally, getting rid of your money would have been a better use of it than ordering Heroes of Wrestling. Not an exaggeration. So this will offend people who like money. This will offend people who think, because anyone that has ever thought, a quality thought, will respect the value of education or the value of just thinking things through, which Heroes of Wrestling was never thought through in any sort of complex detail, any sort of forethought. And overall, this should just offend humanity, and I will get into that later. But this will offend just humanity as a whole. It should. If you're a member of humanity, which you are, this should just offend you. If the other 3 didn't, as a whole, it should. God. Okay, let's start with the card. First match, the Samoan SWAT team versus Marty Jannetty and Tommy Rogers. The only thing I have to say about that is it's Marty Jannetty, and he loses. Oh my God. Anything post the Rockers, Marty Jannetty, all you have to say is Marty Jannetty was in it, and then you know. You have it. That's all you need to know. Marty Jannetty was in it. You got Greg the Hammer Valentine, and he's got Sensational Sherry, versus George the Animal Steel. Slow, awful, terrible. Sensational Sherry was fine. She looked good. Glad to see her. She was doing all right. These guys, and I don't want to be disrespectful. I respect what they've done in the wrestling business. I'm not trying to be mean to them. But if you put on, this for the world to see, this is your representation, it's going to be critiqued. And in this case, it will be critiqued heavily. My God. Slow, awful, painful. And Greg the Hammer Valentine wins after Sensational Sherry gets involved in the finish, and then George the Animal Steel destroys the ring. A colossal waste of time. Too Cold Scorpio defeats Julio Fantastico, which is actually I will say it's actually a wrestling match. Not big names, but it's a wrestling match. This is supposed to be a wrestling pay-per-view. It's something that resembles at least a semi-decent wrestling match. So that's good. And that's kind of almost a tease. It's almost a cruel tease. You have something that resembles wrestling with a guy, Too Cold Scorpio, who's, okay, he's pretty, he's just in WWF, and okay, that's good. And it really doesn't set the stage for what is to follow, because what is to follow is the biggest abomination on the card, wrestling-wise. It's been called the worst wrestling match in history. I don't think they're wrong. Whoever is saying that, I really don't think they're wrong. Nikolai Volkov and Iron Sheik versus the Bushwhackers in what can only be described as an insult, not only to wrestling, but just to movement in general. You ever walk? You ever do like a pretend punch? This insults that. Because these people are not, these wrestlers, which they don't even resemble, I have seen better wrestling from blades of grass whistling in the wind, squirrels wrestling each other over a nut, kids play fighting on the playground. There has been better examples of professional wrestling, unintentionally or not, in nature or in classrooms or in other areas of the world than what these four attempted to put on. In between the absurd pre-match antics of Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, in between the strange, sporadic promos throughout the match from the Iron Sheik, is some of the worst fumbling and bumbling I have ever seen in a wrestling match. There is no balance, there is no coordination, there is no sense of mobility or of stability. You have a sense that all four of these men could break their hip at any time, be put into a home, and severely endanger their lives. That is how on the brink this match is to being declared something of like a senior home brawl. Awful. Awful, awful. How this was allowed, sanctioned to be happened, how the promoter thought this would be a good idea, how he seen them in their physical state and allowed them to compete, I will never know. The 8 minutes that this match took could have been better served given to Too Cold Scorpio, because at least he could walk, at least he could move in some sort of way that resembled a human movement, not this arched over, fumbling, missed kick, missed punch, cut a weird promo mockery that this was. Terrible, terrible, terrible. And then you follow it up with Tully Blanchard versus Stan Lane, which is pretty much just who the hell cares? Because by the time of this is the 5th match on the card, and you've really sunk into what the hell Heroes of Wrestling is all about. And you, if you've paid for it, I'm sure at the time, you're probably going, well, something needs to happen here for me to justify my money. And then you get this boring, just meh. That it's not even like a bad WCW, match or angle in the late 90s where, okay, it's bad, but it's like almost a self-parody. It's almost some sort of, you can laugh at it. That's not a laughing matter. This is just boring for the sake of being boring and awful. And then you followed up with Abdullah the Butcher versus One Man Gang. And double count out, blood, slow, awful. Do yourself a favor, mute it. If you're watching it, open up a new tab and watch Akeem, which was One Man Gang. Watch that. Watch some clips of Akeem. That was kind of funny. He had kind of a funny theme song. It's better than the 8 minutes you're going to watch spent in that match. God, terrible. Then you got Jimmy the Snuka defeating Bob Orton Jr. Rest holds. Gotta love those rest holds. Boring, awful, terrible. And the sad thing is, minus the Nikolai Volkov Iron Sheik versus Bushwhackers match, all of that else pales in comparison to the main event. Pales in comparison. It doesn't even come close. As awful, as boring, as awful as the camera angles are, as terrible as the audio is, as just an affront to wrestling, the whole thing is, it pales in comparison to the main event. Because what you have after Bob Orton Jr. and Jimmy Snuka is arguably the worst, probably the most drunken promo ever made by Jake the Snake, where he rambles about, you want to play cards? I've got 22. You want to play blackjack? I got 2 of those too. You want to play aces and eights? Well, I've got too many of those too. drunk, maybe high, maybe a combination of the both. Whatever it was, terrible. How did the promoter see this and not go, Jake, you're off the show. Get the hell out of here. Go away. We don't need you anymore, Jake. You're drunk. We're going to put Jim Neidhart, triple threat. That could have worked. But again, that requires thought. That requires basic exercise of the mind. Using it in some sort of fashion that is challenging or capable of coming up with a good idea. But no, this promo's allowed to happen. And then he's allowed to enter the ring. Well, he doesn't even enter the ring for his entrance. He comes, puts his snake down in the ring, walks back up the ramp and disappears for a few seconds. Then he comes back down, grabs a lady's hand in the front row, rubs it on his chest in the most perverted way imaginable, I promise you that. And then he gets into the ring and proceeds to drunkenly stumble and fumble around while Jim Neidhart has a look on his face of utter regret and just pure, you have to feel bad for the man because you can see at that time he realizes truly what he has gotten himself into. And Jim Neidhart, if I ever meet you again after watching this promo, I will sincerely offer my hand to you and shake it and say, I am very sorry that you had to deal with that. And I'm glad Jake the Snake has received all the help in the world that he has now, and he's better. But my God, if Beyond the Mat didn't do enough good of a job showcasing how bad of a state Jake the Snake was in 1999, this pay-per-view sure as hell did, because it was awful. And to salvage this, to salvage Jim Neidhart versus Jake the Snake, the promoter decides, well, we'll turn the main event of King Kong Bundy versus Yokozuna. We'll have them come down and we'll turn it all into a final tag team match. Sure, that makes sense. Except for the fact that Jake the Snake Roberts is still in the main event and being featured. This drunken man who can barely walk is still on your pay-per-view show that people have paid money to see, and he is performing like a fool. This doesn't make sense. It's stupid. But Heroes of Wrestling, continuing with the theme of stupidity, jeez. The match is awful, terrible. It ends with Jake the Snake being shoeless, walking around the ring, dropping the snake on his promoter, and thank God for the people at home, but unfortunately for the people in attendance, Jake the Snake takes his snake, in like a phallic fashion, and he pretends to do stuff with it. It's not on the broadcast, be very thankful for that, but you can sure as hell read about it, and you truly feel absolutely awful for those in attendance who would bear witness to something like that, because that would haunt you. If the rest of the show didn't haunt you for life, Jake the Snake touching his actual snake in weird ways, I am sure that would leave a haunting impression on even the most stone cold of minds. Terrible. And that is how the whole pay-per-view concludes. Isn't that a fitting end? Drunken Jake the Snake dropping his snake on the promoter of the show. I think that is really symbolic. So in summary, Heroes of Wrestling 1999 pay-per-view. This is an affront to humanity. NASA, landing men on the moon, doing everything they've done in space. The discovery of vaccines for diseases and treatments for other diseases, and pretty much every good thought that has advanced society. Good works of art. Michelangelo and Picasso, creativity, singers like rappers, Eminem, or creative artists like Madonna, people that have created art that in one way or another can be appreciated, or have made advances in medical and science ways that have advanced humanity. All of that. Heroes of Wrestling is a complete and utter affront to all of that, because it says, oh, sure, we recognize all the great things that humanity has done, but we're going to do this. A drunken, awfully poor-produced wrestling pay-per-view show that people will pay money to see that will completely offend, shock, and insult everyone that has ever watched it. Terrible! Be ashamed! My God, the only redeeming thing about this pay-per-view is that some of these wrestlers who probably needed a paycheck got one, and that's alright, I guess. Every other reason for this pay-per-view to exist is not worthy, and it really does hold humanity back. We are fighting. I truly believe that advances that we are waiting to make in technology and whatnot that we can't? Somewhere along the line, you trace back where these challenges start. It is Heroes of Wrestling holding it back. You ever hear the phrase, you're only as fast as the slowest member of the team? This pay-per-view is the slowest member of the team. It needs to be exiled, cut off, deleted from existence, forgotten. Heroes of Wrestling? What? I don't remember. I don't recall. End it. It needs to end. If you think I am exaggerating, if you think that I am being of hyperbolic nature, I am not. Watch it yourself. Torture yourself. I don't care. You shouldn't. But if you really want to question this, if you really want to see, I wonder what Nikolai Volkov and Iron Sheik are capable of the ring and capable in the ring in 1999. Watch it and be amazed and be offended and be insulted, and then you will know where I'm coming from when I say Heroes of Wrestling is the worst pay-per-view ever made in the wrestling genre industry. Period. I'm Brett Litke. And I'm sorry that I had to review this for myself. I'm not sorry for any of you. I'm sorry for myself. Truly, I will have to go on a discovery of self-forgiveness after this. Thank you.